Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1899, late autumn. The Boston Mountains in the Ozarks stood like ancient sentinels over the valley floor. Their limestone cliffs bathed in the golden light of a waning sun. The region had become more accessible since the railroads arrived a decade earlier, but vast stretches remained untouched by progress, holding tight to secrets buried deep within the rolling hills and dense forests. This particular section of the Ozarks, with its distinctive karst topography of caves, sinkholes, and underground waterways, had always been regarded with a mixture of reverence and superstition by those who lived there. Local legends spoke of places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where water flowed in ways that defied natural law, and where those who strayed from established paths sometimes never returned. The case that would come to be known as the Macabre Well of the Ozark Sisters began when a respected merchant from Springfield, Missouri, Abernathy Hollister, reported that 9 travelers who had set out from his general store toward the southern route had never reached their intended destinations in Arkansas. Hollister was no alarmist. At 63, he had spent his entire adult life in the region and understood well the hazards of frontier travel. His concern emerged gradually as weeks passed, with no word from those who had promised to send back confirmation of their safe arrival. What made this disappearance particularly unusual was that it wasn't a single person or even a single party that vanished. These were 9 separate travelers who had departed over the span of 4 months, each taking the same southern route through a remote valley in the Boston Mountains area. They had little in common beyond their chosen path and their failure to arrive. Official records from the Newton County Courthouse, uncovered in 1962, revealed that Sheriff Thaddeus Hargrove had initially dismissed the reports. The Ozarks were notorious for their winding, confusing trails that often led inexperienced travelers astray. It wasn't uncommon for folks to take twice as long to reach their destination or to change course entirely. The sheriff's ledger, preserved in the county historical archives, noted his assumption that the missing had simply found different paths or settled elsewhere. Travelers often change plans, he wrote in his official log for October 1899. 9 missing over 4 months along a route traveled by dozens weekly is unfortunate, but not cause for alarm. But Hollister was insistent. His careful record-keeping showed that none of the 9 had ever collected parcels that awaited them at their destinations. None had sent word back as promised. And strangest of all, each had mentioned stopping at the sisters' homestead for water before their journey through the most arduous stretch of wilderness. This consistent detail, repeated in conversations with 9 different people who had no connection to one another, struck Hollister as significant. "It's not natural," he wrote in his letter to Sheriff Hargrove, dated November 12, 1899. 9 souls, all mentioning the same landmark, all failing to complete a journey many others make without incident. Something is amiss in Holleridge Valley, and I fear it centers on this homestead and these sisters. The first to disappear was August Willoughby, a 42-year-old clockmaker traveling south to establish a new shop in Eureka Springs. His wagon and prized collection of timepieces never arrived. Hollister recalled him as a methodical man, precise in his habits and plans, who had promised to send word of his arrival within a week of his departure in late July. No such message ever came. Following him were Josephine Blackwood, a widowed herbalist who had supplied Hollister's store with medicinal preparations for years, and was heading south to gather rare plants said to grow in the valleys near the White River. Prescott Thornfield, a land surveyor working for a saint, Lewis Development Company interested in timber rights. The Langston brothers, Silas and Ezekiel, timber scouts themselves, heading to assess a tract of old-growth forest. Miriam Dalton, a seamstress traveling to join her sister's established business in Bentonville. Porter Washburn, a journalist for the Arkansas Gazette, researching a series on Ozark folklore. Zachariah Pendleton, a retired reverend journeying to preach at a revival in Harrison. And finally, Hammond Coopersmith, a blacksmith headed for new opportunities in the growing tourist town of Eureka Springs. What linked these 9 souls was their conversation with Hollister before departure. Each had been advised to follow the main trail south until they reached a split oak tree marking a fork in the path. The left route was longer but well-traveled, following the ridge line for miles before descending gradually into the valley beyond. The right path was shorter but required passage through a steep, narrow valley known locally as Hollow Ridge, where the limestone cliffs rose sharply on either side and the trail occasionally disappeared into creek beds before re-emerging. Most experienced travelers took the longer route for safety and ease, but these 9, each for their own reasons, time constraints, curiosity, adventurous spirit, had mentioned their intention to take the Hollow Ridge path. More significantly, each had mentioned their intention to stop at the Thornfield sisters' homestead for water and possible lodging for the night. This detail emerged clearly in Hollister's records and subsequent interviews. The mention of this homestead was consistent across all 9 cases, yet Hollister himself knew little about it beyond vague local rumors of 2 reclusive women who had settled in the valley some years prior. "They keep to themselves," he wrote of the sisters in his letter to the sheriff, "but travelers speak of their hospitality, offering water from what they call their sacred well to those passing through. I've never met them myself, nor has anyone else in town that I can find, save Dr. Sullivan, who claims to have treated one for a broken arm some years back. It strikes me as peculiar that these women, so little known in our community, should be mentioned by all 9 of the missing." Sheriff Hargrove's initial reluctance to investigate changed in late November of 1899, when Nathaniel Reynolds, a wealthy businessman from St. Louis, arrived in the county demanding action. His associate, Hammond Coopersmith, the 9th missing traveler, had been carrying documents and funds for a business venture that Reynolds had substantial interest in. Reynolds offered a considerable reward for information, sufficient to motivate the sheriff to form a search party. $200 upon recovery of Coopersmith or his effects, Reynolds wrote in a notice posted in town, and an additional $300 for information leading to understanding of his fate, should that fate prove tragic. The official report, filed on November 30, 1899, and later preserved by the Missouri Historical Society, details the beginning of what would become one of the most disturbing cases in Ozark history. "Assembled a party of 6 men to investigate the disappearance of travelers along the southern route through Hollow Ridge Valley," wrote Sheriff Hargrove. Local guide Jeremiah Cottonwood claims knowledge of the Thornfield sisters' residence mentioned by the missing persons. Party includes Deputy Marshal Franklin Whitaker, Reverend Samuel Millbrook, Dr. Phineas Sullivan, who claims prior acquaintance with the sisters, and 2 volunteers from town, Gerald Burke and Thomas Holloway. Departure set for sunrise. The search party left on December 1, 1899, with provisions for 3 days. The weather was unseasonably cold, with frost coating the ground as they rode out. They followed the main trail south, just as the travelers had, reaching the split oak tree by midday. At this juncture, as noted in Sheriff Hargrove's journal, the group paused to discuss their approach. "Oak shows signs of lightning strike since last I passed this way," wrote the sheriff. "Half the branches stripped bare, with curious scorch patterns spiraling down the trunk. Cottonwood says this is a bad omen." The Reverend laughed but crossed himself when he thought no one was looking. Taking the right fork, they entered Hollow Ridge Valley, a narrow passage between limestone bluffs that rose steeply on either side. The path descended sharply, following what appeared to be a dry creek bed, for nearly a mile before opening into a broader valley floor. The winter sun, already low in the December sky, barely penetrated to where they rode, casting the passage in deep shadow despite the early afternoon hour. Jeremiah Cottonwood, the local guide, seemed increasingly uneasy as they progressed. The sheriff's report noted that Cottonwood repeatedly mentioned that he'd only heard of the Thornfield sisters, but had never actually met them. Local superstition held that the sisters were reclusive and preferred not to have visitors, but were known to offer water to passing travelers from their sacred well. Cottonwood keeps glancing up at the ridge line, Hargrove wrote, says he feels watched, though we've seen no sign of habitation or human presence. Reverend Millbrook attempted to ease tensions with scripture readings, but this seems only to agitate our guide further. By nightfall, the party had reached a small clearing where a spring-fed creek provided fresh water. They made camp, planning to reach the Thornfield homestead by noon the following day. According to the sheriff's journal, it was during this night that they first experienced strange acoustics in the valley, sounds that seemed to carry from much farther than should be possible, including what several men described as distant female voices in conversation, despite there being no known settlements nearby. "Burke woke us all just past midnight," the sheriff recorded, claimed to hear women talking as clearly as if they stood among our bedrolls, yet no one was there. Cottonwood refused to go back to sleep thereafter, sitting with his rifle across his knees until dawn. Says the valley plays tricks with sound, that water running beneath the limestone carries voices from miles away. A rational explanation, yet I confess it disturbed my sleep as well. The morning of December 2nd brought fog that clung to the valley floor, reducing visibility to mere yards. The party continued cautiously, following the creek that Cottonwood insisted would lead them to the Thornfield property. The fog grew thicker as they proceeded, seeming to absorb both light and sound, until each man appeared as little more than a shadow to his companions just a few feet away. "Most unnatural fog I've encountered," wrote Hargrove. "Does not behave as fog should, flowing against the wind at times, swirling around our legs like living tendrils. Temperature varies strangely as well, with patches of warmth amid the general chill. Cottonwood says this is typical of the valley, a product of the springs beneath the ground, but his voice lacks conviction." By mid-morning, they emerged from the fog into a small valley surrounded by limestone bluffs. There, nestled against the base of the northern ridge, stood a two-story limestone house, weathered but solid, with a smaller structure nearby that appeared to be a storage shed or smokehouse. A carefully tended garden, now dormant in the winter cold, spread from the house to a nearby creek that bubbled clear and cold from the base of the cliff. Most notably, as recorded in multiple accounts, was the well. Unlike typical wells of the region that were simply stone-lined shafts with a wooden cover and winch, this one featured an unusual stone construction rising nearly 4 feet above ground. The circular wall was formed of precisely fitted limestone blocks without mortar, carved with what appeared to be decorative patterns that Reverend Millbrook, one of the search party members, described as reminiscent of ancient symbols, though not of any known Christian origin. The sheriff's report contains this clinical observation. Approached the homestead at approximately 11:30 a.m. No signs of activity or habitation visible. Chimney cold, no livestock present. Called out repeatedly with no response. Proceeded to examine the property for evidence related to missing travelers. What the official report doesn't convey is the growing sense of unease that permeated the private correspondence between search party members and their families. Letters that would later be collected by Professor Durham of Arkansas College in his 1967 compilation, Forgotten Mysteries of the Boston Mountains. In a letter to his wife that was never sent but found among his personal effects, Deputy Marshal Whitaker wrote, "The silence of the place was unnatural. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The well drew my attention in a manner I cannot explain, a compulsion to approach it, to peer into its depths. The Reverend stopped me, gripping my arm with surprising strength, warning me not to look directly into it. I laughed at his superstition then, but now, as night falls, and we remain in this accursed valley, I find myself agreeing with his caution." Dr. Sullivan, in his private journal, noted, "Recognize the house as the one I visited in '85, though it seems changed somehow. The proportions not quite as I remember, the windows placed differently." When I mentioned this to Hargrove, he looked at me strangely, saying the house was clearly decades old and could not have been altered. Yet I know what I saw then and what I see now. Something is amiss with the very structure of the place. The search of the property yielded disturbing findings. Though no direct signs of the missing travelers were immediately apparent, the sheriff's men discovered several items that raised alarm. In the main house, they found a ledger containing entries that appeared to track visitors. 9 recent entries matched the descriptions and approximate dates of the missing persons. The ledger contained more than just names and dates, however. Each entry included bizarre notations. Subject A, W. Resonant frequency determined to be 42. 7 Hertz, excellent vessel potential. And subject JB, higher than average water content and cellular structure, requires modified approach. More concerning was the discovery in the storage shed. Hidden beneath sacks of grain were personal effects. A pocket watch matching the description of August Willoughby's prized timepiece. A leather satchel containing surveying tools. A journalist's notebook with the name Porter Washburn inscribed on the cover, and other items that could reasonably be connected to the missing travelers. Items appeared deliberately preserved, wrote Sheriff Hargrove, arranged with care, almost as if for display or record-keeping purposes. No signs of struggle or violence, yet the collection of personal effects from all 9 missing persons in one location suggests foul play of some kind. The most troubling discovery, however, came when Deputy Whitaker and Jeremiah Cottonwood examined the well more closely. The water level appeared normal, but when Whitaker lowered a lantern on a rope to better illuminate the shaft, he reported seeing what looked like a secondary passage or tunnel leading off from the main shaft approximately 15 feet below the surface. According to Reverend Millbrook's journal, Whitaker called us to the well, his voice tight with restraint. The lantern he had lowered revealed not merely a well shaft, but what appeared to be a horizontal tunnel, man-made, extending northward beneath the limestone ridge. The discovery might have been merely curious were it not for what else the light revealed. Scratches in the stone around the tunnel entrance, as if made by desperate hands, and what seemed to be a piece of fabric caught on the rough rock. When raised, the cloth was identified as matching the pattern of a vest Hollister had described Coopersmith wearing on the day of his departure. The search party faced a dilemma. Night was approaching, and proper exploration of the tunnel would require equipment they didn't have. Sheriff Hargrove made the decision to leave 2 men to watch the property, while the rest returned to town for reinforcements and appropriate tools. Deputy Whitaker and Guide Cottonwood volunteered to remain behind. "They will maintain a vigil from a concealed position near the creek," Hargrove wrote, "to observe any return of the sisters or other activity at the homestead. Explicit instructions given not to enter the well or tunnel under any circumstances until our return. Both men well armed and provisioned for 2 days." This decision would prove fatal. The follow-up party, consisting of Sheriff Hargrove and 4 additional men, departed the following morning, December 3, 1899. They brought ropes, lanterns, and mining equipment borrowed from a local operation, as well as additional firearms. The weather had worsened, with a cold rain falling steadily throughout their journey. They reached the Thornfield homestead shortly after noon, When they arrived, they found no sign of Whitaker or Cottonwood. Calls went unanswered. The property appeared exactly as they had left it. Except for one detail, the well cover had been removed and now lay broken beside the stone structure. Sheriff Hargrove's report, filed later that evening, contains this stark entry: no sign of Whitaker or Cottonwood. Evidence suggests they attempted exploration of the well tunnel despite orders to wait. Rope found tied to well structure extending down shaft. Blood traces observed on the well's inner stone rim. Search of the tunnel deemed too dangerous without proper equipment and additional men. In his private journal, Hargrove was more candid. Something happened here. Their bedrolls remained by the creek, cold but undisturbed. No signs of struggle at the campsite. Yet, at the well, clear evidence of a violent event. Blood spatter not consistent with accidental injury. More disturbing still, blood appears to flow upward on the stone rim, defying gravity. The men refused to approach the well now, claiming to hear voices emanating from its depths, whispers too faint to discern words, but in what they swear is a woman's voice. The party returned to town, and Sheriff Hargrove telegraphed the state authorities requesting assistance. The response came quickly. A specialized team would arrive from Jefferson City within 3 days, including men experienced in mine rescue operations who could properly explore the underground passage. During this waiting period, Sheriff Hargrove ordered research into the Thornfield sisters, about whom surprisingly little was known. Town records revealed that the property had been purchased in 1883 by Cordelia and Millicent Thornfield, unmarried sisters who had apparently arrived from Massachusetts with sufficient funds to buy the land outright. Few in town had met them personally. They rarely came in for supplies, and when they did, they spoke little and departed quickly. The local postmaster recalled that they received regular correspondence from the East, often bearing academic or institutional seals. The sisters themselves were described as educated in speech and manner, but strange in their intensity. They appeared to be in their 40s when they first arrived, both tall with striking white hair despite their relatively young age. Most notable was the report from Dr. Phineas Sullivan, who claimed to have been called to their property in 1885 to treat Millicent for a broken arm. He described the interior of the home as surprisingly well appointed for such a remote location, with books on geology, hydrology, and what appeared to be ancient languages. He also noted that Cordelia had been intensely protective of what she called their research and had prevented him from entering certain rooms of the house. She spoke of their work as being of profound significance to the understanding of water as a medium rather than merely a substance, Sullivan recalled in his statement to the sheriff. I took this to mean they were studying mineral content, or perhaps medicinal applications, though her manner suggested something more esoteric. When I inquired directly, she changed the subject, and shortly thereafter hastened my departure despite my concerns about proper setting of her sister's fracture. No one had reported seeing the sisters in town for at least 6 months prior to the disappearances. Last purchase at my establishment was in late May, reported the general store owner. Unusual items, glass tubing, chemicals I had to special order from St. Louis, and a large quantity of salt. They paid in gold coin, as always, and declined conversation beyond what was necessary for the transaction. On December 7, 1899, the specialized team arrived from Jefferson City. Led by Mining Inspector Bartholomew Sullivan, no relation to the doctor, they brought equipment for proper exploration of underground spaces, safety lamps, ropes, breathing apparatus, and tools for shoring up unstable passages. The team, accompanied by Sheriff Hargrove, departed immediately for the Thornfield property. The official report of what they discovered was sealed by court order in January 1900, allegedly to prevent panic. It remained sealed until 1962, when historian Eleanor Pembroke successfully petitioned for its release as part of her research into Ozark disappearances. The contents explain why authorities might have wanted it suppressed. The team arrived at the Thornfield homestead on the evening of December 7th and established a secure camp. They set guards in rotating shifts and kept fires burning throughout the night. According to Mining Inspector Sullivan's log, the night passed uneventfully, though several men reported unusual dreams of flowing water and distant voices calling their names. The following morning, they began their careful exploration of the well and its tunnel. Using proper safety protocols, Mining Inspector Sullivan and two experienced miners descended into the well shaft. They carried safety lamps designed for coal mines, which would extinguish automatically in the presence of dangerous gases, as well as ropes and signaling systems to maintain contact with the surface team. Sullivan's report describes what they found. The well shaft descends vertically approximately 25 feet before opening into a natural limestone cavern that has been artificially expanded. The horizontal tunnel observed by the previous search party is one of three such passages leading from this central chamber. Each tunnel appears to have been carefully excavated and reinforced with timber supports in a professional manner consistent with mining operations. The team systematically explored each tunnel. The first, heading east, extended about 40 feet before ending in a small chamber, containing what Sullivan described as scientific equipment of unknown purpose, including glass vessels, copper tubing, and containers of various chemicals. Detailed sketches included, with the report show apparatus resembling distillation equipment, but arranged in configurations that made little sense to the mining experts. The second tunnel, heading west, contained wooden shelving lined with dozens of specimen jars, holding what appeared to be preserved animal organs. Labels on these jars, written in a cramped feminine hand, noted dates and cryptic annotations. Spring water immersion, 30 days, cellular transformation proceeding, and well water exposure, 60 days, note, structural changes to tissue composition. It was the third tunnel, heading north as originally observed, that yielded the most disturbing discoveries. Extending more than 100 yards beneath the limestone ridge, it opened into a large natural cavern that had been adapted for human use. Sullivan's report details the scene with the clinical precision of a man attempting to maintain his professional composure in the face of horror. The cavern measures approximately 60 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling reaching 30 feet at its highest point. Natural limestone formations have been incorporated into what can only be described as a laboratory setting. At the center is a circular pool of water fed by a natural spring emerging from the north wall. The pool has been lined with fitted stone similar to that used in the well construction above ground. Surrounding this pool are 7 stone tables arranged in a precise circle. Each table bears restraint mechanisms consisting of iron rings anchored into the stone. Upon and around these tables, evidence indicates systematic dissection procedures were conducted. Most significantly, we discovered human remains in various states. 11 distinct individuals could be accounted for based on cranial count. Among the identifiable personal effects were items matching descriptions of the 9 missing travelers. We also discovered remains consistent with Deputy Whitaker and Guide Cottonwood. Of the Thornfield sisters, we found no immediate evidence, though a significant collection of journals and papers was recovered from a stone shelf carved into the eastern wall of the cavern. What Sullivan's official report omits, but his private journal reveals, is the unusual state of the remains. The bodies exhibit unprecedented levels of desiccation, he wrote in entries, not made public until decades later, as if all moisture had been systematically extracted from the tissues. Yet there are no signs of conventional dehydration processes. More disturbing still is the state of certain internal organs, particularly the brains, which show evidence of a crystalline formation throughout the tissue, almost as if the cellular structure had been replaced by some mineral compound I cannot identify. The recovery operation took 3 full days. The remains were carefully removed and transported back to the county seat for identification and proper burial. The journals and papers were collected as evidence, and the well entrance was sealed with dynamite under orders from the state authorities. Site deemed hazardous due to unstable subsurface conditions, reads the official declaration, though no actual evidence of structural instability was noted in any of the exploration reports. The contents of the recovered journals, partially translated and analyzed by Professor Durham in 1967, reveal the true nature of what the Thornfield sisters had been pursuing. They were not sisters at all, nor were they named Thornfield. They were Dr. Victoria Havisham and Dr. Elizabeth Montague, former colleagues at Miskatonic University in Massachusetts, who had been dismissed for pursuing what the university termed research avenues that transgress natural law and ethical boundaries. Their journals detailed decades of research into what they called the permeable barriers between water and other realms. They had chosen the Ozarks specifically for its unique karst topography, where sinkholes, caves, and underground rivers created natural conditions they believed facilitated their work. The limestone formations here serve as ideal conduits, wrote Havisham in an early entry. The water that passes through them carries properties unlike any we have observed elsewhere. Our preliminary tests confirm significantly higher conductivity of both electricity and certain frequencies of sound. More intriguing still, samples taken from the deepest springs exhibit molecular structures that periodically shift configuration without apparent cause. The well was their masterwork, not merely a water source, but what they termed a confluence point, where certain arrangements of stone and water created what they believed was a thinning of barriers between dimensions. Their research had led them to believe that under specific conditions, these points could be used to access knowledge and entities from elsewhere. We have confirmed auditory contact, reads an entry from 1897. Voices emerge from the well at precisely 3:17 a.m. on the night of the new moon. Recording devices fail consistently, but we have transcribed what we can discern. They speak of a place beyond the permeable boundary and promise knowledge in exchange for what they call vessels of transference. The journals become increasingly erratic in entries dating from early 1899, suggesting that the women had either begun to experience mental deterioration or had actually achieved some form of contact with whatever they were seeking. References to voices from the depths and knowledge flowing like water appear frequently. Most disturbing are the clinical notes regarding vessel preparation, apparently referring to their victims. According to their notes, the 9 travelers were not randomly selected, but chosen based on physical and psychological traits the women believed made them suitable for their experiments. Each had been offered water from the well upon their arrival, water containing a sedative compound that rendered them unconscious. They were then transported to the underground laboratory for the procedure. Subject responds well to the preliminary infusion, reads one entry believed to refer to August Willoughby. Cellular saturation at 62% and rising. The voices speak through him intermittently, though his conscious mind appears unaware of the transmissions. They continue to demand more vessels before they will permit us to cross over. We have promised compliance. The final journal entry, dated November 28, 1899, suggests that something went catastrophically wrong with their work. Written in a shaky hand different from earlier entries, it reads only, "They are coming through now. We cannot close what we have opened. The water rises." Of the women themselves, no physical evidence was ever found. The state authorities officially concluded that they had fled before the investigation reached them, though this explanation satisfied few who were familiar with the case. Sheriff Hargrove noted in his final report, no tracks leading from the property despite soft ground that would have preserved such evidence. No items of personal value removed from the house. No sightings by any travelers or residents in the surrounding counties. It is as if they simply vanished from existence. The Thornfield property was deliberately burned to the ground on December 15, 1899, under orders from the state government. The land was declared federal property and access restricted. In 1962, when historian Pembroke attempted to visit the site as part of her research, she found the entire valley had been intentionally flooded during the creation of Beaver Lake in the 1960s. Whether this was coincidental or deliberate remains a matter of speculation. What cannot be disputed are the 11 graves in the Newton County Cemetery, marked with a single shared headstone reading only "Victims of the Well." 18D9. Local tradition holds that on certain nights, particularly during autumn when the water level is low, the sound of flowing water can be heard emanating from these graves, even in the driest weather. The case officially closed in January 1900. The state-issued explanation cited murderous insanity on the part of two women who had preyed on travelers before fleeing justice. This explanation, while containing elements of truth, omits much of what was discovered in the cavern laboratory and nothing of what the journals revealed about their true purpose. Professor Durham's 1967 analysis suggests a more disturbing possibility, that the women succeeded in whatever they were attempting, and either passed voluntarily into whatever elsewhere they had accessed or were taken there. He cites as evidence the lack of any trail or sightings of the women despite an extensive manhunt, and the unusual water patterns in the cavern, noted by Mining Inspector Sullivan, who wrote that the central pool appeared to flow both upward and downward simultaneously in defiance of natural principles. In a footnote to his analysis, Durham mentions a curious addendum he discovered in Sheriff Hargrove's personal papers, never included in any official report. It describes a moment during the evidence recovery when one of the miners called attention to the central pool. Sullivan and Hargrove approached to find the water exhibiting what Hargrove described as a rhythmic motion inconsistent with any natural spring action, almost as if breathing. When Sullivan lowered his lamp closer to the surface, Hargrove wrote that he was certain he saw not merely the reflection of our own faces, but other faces looking back. Women with white hair, but aged beyond human possibility, their eyes filled with the darkness of deep water. The well shaft and tunnels remained sealed beneath the waters of Beaver Lake. The journals recovered from the cavern laboratory were supposedly transferred to federal authorities in 1900 and have never been made available for public examination, despite numerous Freedom of Information Act requests by researchers in subsequent decades. The case of the Ozark sisters Macabre officially remains an example of isolated criminal insanity in an era when travel through remote areas carried inherent risks. Unofficially, it joins the constellation of strange incidents in the Ozarks, where the unique landscape, with its hidden caves, disappearing streams, and ancient limestone formations, seems to occasionally permit things that defy conventional explanation. In the decades following the incident, several researchers have noted a peculiar pattern that wells throughout the Ozark region, particularly those constructed of fitted limestone without mortar in the pre-1900 period, have an unusually high rate of acoustic anomalies and inexplicable water level fluctuations. Folklore researcher Dr. Mary Ann Woodson documented over 30 accounts of well owners reporting sounds like distant voices in conversation emanating from their wells, particularly during autumn months. As recently as 1959, a property owner in Newton County reported that water drawn from his century-old well occasionally exhibited unusual properties, including failure to freeze even when left outside during winter temperatures and a tendency to cause momentary disorientation when consumed. County health officials found no contamination, but recommended the well be sealed as a precaution. The owner, Elias Bedford, reportedly complied but later told neighbors that on the night before the sealing, he heard what sounded like women's voices, speaking words in no language I've ever heard, rising from the depths. Most disturbing is the account from Eleanor Pembroke herself, who noted in her private correspondence that after months of researching the case, she began to experience dreams of endless limestone passages filled with flowing water, and would wake to find her bed sheets damp, as if with groundwater, not sweat. She abandoned her research shortly thereafter, citing health concerns. The waters of Beaver Lake now cover the site of the Thornfield homestead and its terrible well. Fishing guides occasionally report unusual sonar readings in that section of the lake, showing what appear to be structures on the lake bed that don't appear on any maps. Local fishermen tend to avoid the area, claiming that fish caught there don't look right somehow, and that electronic equipment often malfunctions inexplicably, whether natural phenomenon, criminal atrocity, or something that bridges the gap between science and the supernatural. The case of the Ozark sisters Macabre well reminds us that in the late 19th century, the remoteness of the Ozark Mountains provided not just isolation for those seeking independence from civilization, but also concealment for those pursuing goals outside the boundaries of both law and nature. The 9 travelers who disappeared seeking only water and shelter on their journey, along with the 2 men who tried to find them, remain silent beneath their shared headstone. The water that flows through the limestone chambers of the Ozarks continues its ancient journey, carrying perhaps more than merely the minerals that give it its clarity, and somewhere in archives still sealed, or in the depths of the artificial lake that now covers so much of Newton County's landscape, the full truth remains submerged, like so many secrets in the Ozarks, hidden just beneath the surface, in the spaces where darkness and water have always held dominion. But the story doesn't end with the flooding of Holleridge Valley and the creation of Beaver Lake. In the summer of 1968, a drought caused the lake's water level to drop significantly, exposing portions of land that had been underwater for years. A group of college students on a camping trip explored the newly revealed shoreline and discovered what they described as the top of a circular stone structure protruding from the mud. Local authorities, alerted to the find, quickly cordoned off the area. Official statements claimed it was merely the remains of an old silo or grain storage facility, but witnesses reported seeing men in government vehicles removing items from the site before it was once again covered by rising waters when the drought ended. One student, Marcus Devlin, managed to photograph the structure before officials arrived. The photograph, blurry and overexposed, shows what appears to be a circular stone wall with carvings similar to those described on the Thornfield well. Devlin later reported that shortly after the incident, his dormitory room was broken into and the photograph stolen, though nothing else of value was taken. When he attempted to speak publicly about what he had seen, he found himself the subject of unexpected scrutiny from federal authorities regarding alleged irregularities in his student loans. He withdrew from the university the following semester and declined all further comment on the matter. Bartholomew Sullivan, the mining inspector who had led the original exploration of the Thornfield well, lived until 1945, spending his final years in a sanitarium in Kansas City. The attending physician noted in his records that Sullivan refused to drink water unless it had been boiled and blessed by a priest. In his periods of lucidity, he would speak of the contamination of all groundwater in the Ozarks and warn that what flows beneath the hills is not merely water, but a conduit. On his deathbed, according to the night nurse's records, Sullivan claimed to have kept a secret portion of the journals found in the cavern laboratory. "They speak of water as a living thing," he reportedly said in his final hours, "not merely as a substance that sustains life, but as something capable of consciousness itself under certain conditions. They believed the limestone of the Ozarks, formed from ancient seabeds, retained some essential quality of the primordial waters that once covered all land, that this quality allowed water passing through it to serve as a medium for something else. Most researchers who have studied the case focus on the obvious horrors, the missing travelers, the macabre laboratory, the evidence of systematic murder, but Professor Durham, in his final unpublished notes, discovered after his death in 1971, suggested something far more insidious. He posited that the Thornfield sisters, or rather, Doctors Havisham and Montague, had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. Consider, he wrote, that no trace of these women was ever found despite an extensive search. Consider the unusual properties attributed to water drawn from certain wells in the region. Consider the persistent reports of voices heard emanating from groundwater sources throughout the Ozarks. Is it possible that what they discovered was a means not of bringing something through from elsewhere, but of transforming themselves into something that could exist within the water itself? And if so, might they not still be present, diffused throughout the underground waterways and springs of the region, their consciousness preserved in some unfathomable state, continuing to observe, to experiment, to influence? Durham's final notation, written in a shaky hand unlike his normal precise script, reads, "I dreamt of them again last night. They spoke to me from the bottom of a well. They said they have been waiting for someone who understands. They said I could join them. I have decided to abandon this research." 2 weeks later, Durham was found drowned in his bathtub. The official ruling was accidental death due to a heart attack while bathing. His wife, however, told a local reporter that in the days before his death, her husband had become obsessed with the taste of their tap water, claiming it had changed, and had begun collecting samples in glass jars, which he would examine for hours. The most recent chapter in this strange saga came in 2015, when hydrologist Dr. Clarissa Montgomery from the University of Arkansas conducted a comprehensive study of the groundwater systems in the Ozarks. Using advanced imaging techniques and chemical analysis, her team mapped the complex network of underground rivers and caverns that honeycombed the limestone bedrock of the region. Her published findings were thoroughly conventional and focused on conservation and resource management. However, a graduate student who had worked on the project later claimed that certain anomalous readings had been excluded from the final report. According to this unnamed source, several water samples collected from deep aquifers beneath Beaver Lake showed unusual organic compounds and molecular structures inconsistent with known biological material. When these findings were brought to Dr. Montgomery's attention, the student claimed, she ordered all samples destroyed and all mention of them removed from the study. Dr. Montgomery herself has refused to comment on these allegations. Shortly after the completion of the study, she took an unexpected sabbatical and later resigned her position to accept a post at a private research facility in New England. Her forwarding address, according to university records, was in Arkham, Massachusetts, the same town where Havisham and Montague had once been affiliated with Miskatonic University. Perhaps the most unnerving aspect of the entire case is its implications for the countless people who have unknowingly consumed water from the aquifers of the Ozarks over the decades. If there is any truth to the Thornfield sisters' theories about the permeable barriers between water and other realms, or to Professor Durham's disturbing hypothesis about their continued existence within the region's groundwater, then the horror of their work continues to touch lives even today, flowing from countless taps and wells, carrying with it something more than merely minerals and microbes. Water, after all, is the universal solvent. It takes in and dissolves what it encounters. It flows and connects all things. And in the Ozarks, where it has carved intricate passages through ancient stone for millions of years, the water remembers. It carries the region's history within its molecules, including, perhaps, the lingering consciousness of two women who sought to transcend the boundaries between worlds, using the lives of innocent travelers as stepping stones to their terrible apotheosis. The next time you visit the Ozarks and find yourself beside one of its countless springs or wells, pause for a moment. Look into the clear depths. Listen carefully to the sounds of water moving through stone passages carved by time. And ask yourself, is that merely your reflection looking back? Or is there something else gazing up from the depths? Something that has learned to exist within the water itself, patient and ancient, waiting for another traveler to stop and drink? For water always finds a way through. It seeps and flows and connects. It carries the past into the present. And in the Ozarks, some say, it carries whispers from those who have found a way to exist beyond the boundaries of what we understand as life, speaking still from the darkness of a macabre well, now hidden beneath the placid surface of a man-made lake, but never truly silenced. The story continues to evolve, as stories of this nature always do, shifting and changing like water itself. In 2018, a team of spelunkers exploring a previously unmapped cave system near the southeastern shore of Beaver Lake reported finding a chamber deep within the limestone where the walls were carved with symbols similar to those described on the Thornfield well. At the center of this chamber was a pool of water so still that it appeared solid, like black glass. One of the spelunkers, Veronica Nash, an amateur photographer, attempted to capture images of the unusual chamber. When her flash fired, she claimed the surface of the pool momentarily revealed what appeared to be faces looking up from beneath, not reflections, but distinct visages visible within the water itself. Her camera malfunctioned immediately thereafter, and when the team attempted to return to the chamber after replacing the batteries, they became disoriented in the cave system and were unable to locate it again despite extensive searching. Nash developed a peculiar illness in the weeks following the expedition, characterized by periods of disorientation and what her doctors termed visual hallucinations, primarily involving water. She reported seeing faces forming in everything from puddles to her morning coffee. After 3 months of progressively worsening symptoms, she disappeared from her apartment in Fayetteville, leaving behind only a journal filled with increasingly erratic entries about voices calling from every drop of water and the sisters who wait beneath the surface. Her final entry reads simply, "They've shown me how water connects all things, how it can carry consciousness, how we can become one with it. I understand now. I'm going to meet them." Nash has never been found, though her car was discovered parked at a Beaver Lake boat launch. The case remains open as a missing person investigation. Local authorities dismissed any connection to the historical Thornfield case as unfounded speculation fueled by regional folklore. Yet the parallels are difficult to ignore for those familiar with both cases. Nash's journal, portions of which were published by a local newspaper before being sealed as evidence, contains references to two women with white hair who spoke to her from reflective surfaces and promised to show her the realm beyond the water's boundary. In 2020, water quality tests conducted by the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality detected trace amounts of an unidentifiable organic compound in several wells within a 20-mile radius of Beaver Lake. The compound, described as having unusual molecular properties and a structure inconsistent with known biological materials, was deemed non-toxic but of indeterminate origin. Further testing was recommended but apparently never conducted, as no follow-up reports have been made public. Most recently, in the spring of 2023, a recreational diver exploring the bottom of Beaver Lake in the vicinity of what was once Hollow Ridge Valley reported finding a circular stone structure unlike anything I've seen before. His diving camera captured blurry images of what appears to be a well-like construction, partially buried in silt, with faint carvings visible on the exposed stonework. The diver, experienced with over 300 lake dives to his credit, attempted to approach the structure for a closer look, but reported experiencing a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread and the distinct impression of being watched from all directions. He cut his dive short and returned to the surface, where he discovered his wetsuit was inexplicably dry on the inside, despite being submerged for over 40 minutes. He has declined all requests to lead other divers to the site, stating only that some things should remain undisturbed. His photographs, while inconclusive due to the poor visibility common in the lake, show what experts have identified as consistent with the description of the Thornfield well from historical accounts. The case of the Ozark sisters' Macabre well reminds us that some mysteries are best left unsolved, some places best left unexplored, and some waters best left undrunk. For in the karst landscape of the Ozarks, where the boundary between surface and subterranean has always been thin, other boundaries may be equally permeable, between past and present, between science and superstition, between the world we know and whatever waits beyond. The true horror of the case lies not in what was discovered in that underground laboratory, but in what might still remain, diffused throughout the waterways of the region, altered but conscious, observing and waiting. For water, like memory, preserves what it touches. And in the Ozarks, both flow endlessly through chambers of stone, carrying echoes of what has passed, whispering to those who pause to listen. So, if you find yourself traveling those winding roads through the ancient hills, and come upon a well of fitted stone without mortar, or a spring emerging crystal clear from the limestone, remember the 9 travelers who sought only water and found something else entirely. Remember Deputy Whitaker and Guide Cottonwood, whose curiosity led them to a fate too terrible for official reports. Remember the Thornfield sisters, who may have discovered that water can be more than merely a substance. It can be a doorway, a vessel, a means of transformation. And if, as you bend to drink, you hear what sounds like distant voices in conversation, or see what might be faces other than your own reflected in the water's surface, move on quickly and don't look back. For some thirsts are better left unquenched, and some wells, once opened, can never truly be sealed again.